That's right, and we're going to take a look at the map that I've got behind me here to get a sense of what are the major factors that come together to cause both freezing rain events in southern Ontario as well as the longer-lived ice storms. One of the biggest things we need, first of all, is a large area of high pressure over the central part of the province of Quebec. That area of high pressure represents an area of very cold air. And as that cold air works its way down, it moves basically from the center of high pressure in central Quebec down in through to the southwest through areas of the Ottawa Valley and into the remaining parts of southern Ontario. That cold air stays down right down near the ground, like a wedge, if you will, of the coldest, densest conditions. The second part of the situation that we need is a low pressure system coming up, usually from the American deep south or the American southwest. As that low pressure system works its way towards the lower lakes area, what we've also got then is a bunch of warm air coming up from the American deep south. The collision then between the cold air coming from the system in Quebec, the warm air coming up from the U.S. and the deep south, that cold air stays below the warm air rides up above it. There's lift involved, and that lift produces precipitation. With the cold air near the surface, it allows some of that precip to melt on its way down with the warm air that's overriding it, but then right near the ground it freezes up again, and that becomes our freezing rain event. When we talk about just a single event, this particular system only sets up for perhaps a day or two, and then it breaks down. In a true ice storm event, what we're talking about is a series of waves of low pressure system coming up from the southwest or the American south, and what's happening there is ice storms continuing or freezing rain events continuing time after time, allowing that ice to build up. And also very important in freezing rain ice storm events is the fact that the areas don't get above freezing in between these waves of freezing rain. So there's no opportunity for the ice that's accreted to melt. And then basically we're just building and building and building with more ice accretions, and the bigger impacts we get as we get these thicker ice accretions. The other thing to mention too is that as we can see where the yellow push pin is, Simcoe County is in an area where these types of freezing rain events and ice storms can occur. For the most part, the most favored areas for freezing rain tends to be the Ottawa Valley and southern Quebec. But every once in a while we do get these more intense systems set up, and Simcoe County can be affected as well.
What we expect is, we expect individual events, which we manage from our control room here. Then they start increasing in frequency, and what we build from individual events to what we call feeder outages, perhaps substation outages. If we start losing transmission capacity, then we'll be into what's called rotational load shedding, where we actually have, in common terms, what most people call rolling blackouts. And that's where we share the grief, and we'll, on purpose, isolate areas for a certain period of time, typically half an hour to an hour. Then we'll take out another area and restore the original area. And hopefully that will stop any further degradation of the system. But of course, if we lose our transmission supply, then there's not much we can do other than try and reroute power from another transmission source through our distribution network. Starting with mutual aid agreements with many other utilities, including Hydro One, right across the province. We have mutual aid or mutual supply agreements with our vendors that if we or any other utility has a shortfall of material such as poles, transformers, conductor, they have emergency supply procedures where they'll actually reroute supplies that are in normal production to the emergency areas. The Electricity Act of 1998 and other associated legislation requires that PowerStream and all other utilities have a very detailed emergency preparedness plan in place. We produce a newsletter that details what PowerStream will do in an emergency, who to contact, contact numbers, and we also provide some definitions of language that we may use in an emergency. In Simcoe County in particularly, we worked with their office to produce this County of Simcoe critical infrastructure list. And what this does, this details the critical infrastructure in Simcoe County. So when we're restoring power, we will actually prioritize these locations and attempt to get to them first. Individuals and homeowners and businesses should all have a 72-hour plan that they have. For businesses, it's known as a business continuity plan, and it's really up to the nature of the business to what degree they should be planning for emergencies.
Well, this is where it really brings contingency planning or business continuity planning to the forefront. When everybody sees, they see the fire truck responding down the road, the ambulance or the police car, the expectation is that they're going to be there no matter what. But like any other organization, this is staff. These are people that have lives, they have families. And so a long duration power outage, emergency services really have to look at how are they going to deal with the responders and their families, and do they need to take steps to actually protect the families or assist the responders in taking care of their families. Now 72-hour preparedness is important, and we always teach our responders, you need specifically to be prepared for 72 hours so that you can leave your family and come to work. But once a prolonged power outage, we may ask our responders to be on duty for an awful long time. So we have to be well aware that if we want them, we have to be able to look at how we're going to deal with their families. Are they going to have food, power, and do we need to bring them to a reception center and deal with them? So you'll see a lot of municipalities actually set up a reception center specifically for emergency response personnel. A power outage is going to affect our radio systems. For the fire service, we operate, many fire departments have volunteer contingents, and they utilize pagers and portable radios. How do you charge those? You have to have a contingency plan in place to make sure that the people are able to continue to respond, to continue to be able to be called out.
An extended winter power outage can have a significant impact, especially if our service providers are unable to get out to the clients that we provide the services to. And depending on whether they're able to stay at home and they're with family support, or whether they perhaps need to leave their home and go to another center, we would need to determine what that looks like and then be able to discuss with the client and with our service providers what the next steps are to meet those individuals' needs. The CCAC and its contracted service providers do have continuity plans, emergency response plans that they would put into place in the event of an emergency, such as an extended power outage. We would then work with and contact clients and to review the contingency plans that we had developed with them in order to determine what the next steps are and what assistance and support they require. But we would meet and connect on a regular basis, and we would also have connections with the county in order to determine what they were advising and how that would impact the planning that we've been doing. The CCAC does work closely with long-term care homes in that we do authorize clients for admission into the long-term care homes. In the event of an emergency, the CCAC will work with the long-term care homes and the larger community on contingency planning as appropriate to ensure that everybody is receiving the information and the communication that they need. The North Simcoe Muskoka CCAC has an emergency response plan based on the incident management system, and we would, in the event of an emergency, activate our incident management team, who would then meet on a regular basis, would connect with other healthcare partners and providers in the community, and then take the necessary actions to support our clients in the community or identify at-risk clients that may need additional services.
Well, for this question, I can draw upon what I learned in Eastern Ontario when I was medical officer of health there starting in 1998. I had arrived just after they had experienced their ice storm and learned a lot in my discussions with staff about their experience. And in that situation, they had the worst ice storm in living memory that had affected their entire district and beyond. leaving people without power from anywhere from 4 days in the case of their largest city, Brockville, to up to 24 days or so for some of the outlying communities or houses in rural locations. If you think about a power outage from an ice storm, there are a few things that come to mind. One is the obvious, being cold-related health threats. So people being in a home situation without heat or being out and about in the community in sub-zero temperatures puts them at risk of hypothermia or frostbite, and thus people need to be in that situation aware of that risk and dress appropriately. Obviously, people are challenged with keeping their homes heated in that kind of situation. And if they have alternate means of doing so, generally speaking, people took advantage of that, and that can be a wood stove, or it could be perhaps a kerosene space heater, and there are risks associated with that. So while responding to the risk of the cold, they then have to deal with the competing risk of the heating unit that they're using and what could come of that. And the most obvious risk there is a burn, a personal burn, and handling the equipment. Their clothing catching on fire and having severe body burns, having a house fire with the potential for death, smoke inhalation, severe injury or property loss. Everybody has a role in responding to the situation, and that's very typical of what we call a public health issue. The institution of public health doesn't own it on our own by any means. Many have to come together to respond to the challenges. So if you think of municipalities, they're very much the hub of response for an emergency such as this. They organize the response. They have the major response levers, resources. They have the legitimacy to have an emergency response plan for their community in the first place. And they bring together the parties to respond. They have their Emergency Operations Center, and at their EOC, they bring together public health and EMS and fire and police and their own internal resources in communications and social services, and other partners as needed, if necessary, hospitals and others to overcome the hazards that are identified in the situation. The Simcoe-Muskoka District Health Unit has a general emergency plan, and in that plan we sort of basically put on hold everything but what are essential services and reorganize our executive team to take on the tasks of responding to the emergency.